Hi, this is Margaret Byrd, and welcome to Color Quest, and welcome to Port Townsend, Washington. I am here at Fort Worden for this entire week, experiencing a true color explosion, and that is in the way of mushrooms. I'm lucky enough to be attending the International Fungi and Fiber Symposium here, and I am absolutely blown away by the incredible rainbow of colors that is possible from mushrooms and lichen. Now, I have worked with lichen a tiny bit, but I am an absolute novice when it comes to mushrooms. And so I jumped on board to join this group of incredibly knowledgeable dyers who know so much about mycology and how to find all of the hidden color in all those nooks and crannies out in the forest. I thought it might spark some interest in yet another amazing place that nature provides beautiful color for us to use in our dye practices. So about 3 years ago, I was lucky enough to see a photograph somewhere of a rainbow of yarn samples that had been made from mushrooms. That was enough to stop me in my tracks, do a little digging, and that's how I came to learn about the International Fungi and Fiber Symposium. I was so excited to know that it was going to be held just 2 hours from my house, just a hop across the sound. And unfortunately, 2020 arrived, and that was the year that everything shut down. So I have been waiting for almost 3 years now to be able to come to the symposium. And so there was no way I wasn't going to come this time. Don't know if it'll ever be back here. It does move around to different parts of the world. So I strongly encourage you to learn more about the symposium so that you can see what exactly is made available for people who are interested in finding new and different ways to invite natural color into their creative practices. I cannot say enough about the wealth of knowledge that lives amongst this group of people, and also the warm and generous spirit that I have felt here in this group of like-minded people who are craving natural color in one shape or form. So I can't even begin to scratch the surface of what is shared here. I will talk a little bit about some of the things I learned in the classes I took. They have a whole week of courses, of which I can only take 5. But those 5, I focused trying to learn as much as I could about creating color from mushrooms. So I will give you a little commentary of each one of the classes I was fortunate enough to take, but know that there are so many more things to learn from this symposium. And perhaps when it happens again, let's hope in 2024, you might be able to sign up and join along. Trust me, I will do my best to come back to this incredible opportunity of learning and just creative sharing around the topic of natural color. So during this week-long event, every participant had an option to sign up for 5 different classes. So as you might imagine, my target classes had everything to do with mushrooms and natural color. As a fiber Symposium as well, there were a lot of options around different kinds of fiber arts. But you know me, I'm all about the color. So I decided to focus my energy there. I did sign up for 1 half-day foray because I wanted to learn something about how to forage for mushrooms and how to identify those that are for dyeing. So let me talk to you about the first class I took. And this is from a very well-known artist and flower farmer, also from Washington State. Her name is Julie Beeler. You probably have heard of her. She actually has a long history of working with mushrooms for dye sources, and she created the Mushroom Atlas. So if you don't know about that, go check that out because it's a fantastic resource to help you know what to look for and what colors each one of the different mushrooms will make. She is teaching several classes. I was lucky enough to get into her class on lake pigments and inks made from mushrooms. And that is something I'm very interested in. It's something I have not touched in terms of lake pigments here on Color Quest. So I dove into that class and learned a lot about how to take the color in its water-soluble form from mushrooms and turn it into a dry pigment, which can be used to make different kinds of paints, to be used for printing pastes, and things called myco sticks, which are crayons that have the pigment of mushrooms as its color source. It was an amazing class, and if you have an opportunity to work with Julie Beeler, I strongly recommend it. As I said, she's local to me, and I hope maybe one day I get to go down and visit her on her flower farm in Troutdale, Washington. So the second class that I signed up for was my first mushroom dyeing class, and that was with Lobster mushroom. The teacher of that, Marion Richards, is someone who also lives local here, and I tend to bump into her out and about in this natural dyer's world. And I was very excited to work with this edible mushroom that also produces color, and all kinds of color because it is pH sensitive. So we had the opportunity to dye a wool skein. We were able to play with some pH shifts using soda ash and white vinegar, both acidic and alkaline. And we also got to bring our own samples. I chose to bring some silk, which had been treated with alum. And I think the dye bath was getting a little bit exhausted at that point. And so I got a very light sort of orangey yellow, but I still shifted it to pink. So let me show you those dye samples. Now, as I mentioned, I can only take 5 classes. There are a lot more than 5 color families that you can make with dye mushrooms, basically the rainbow. And they had a class here on red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And the third class that I was lucky enough to get into was the green class. And although I thought mistakenly that maybe some of these incredible mushrooms had green as their secret color, instead I was not terribly surprised to find out that using mushrooms that bring yellow and then shifting them with iron was how we achieved many of the greens that we made in the dye class. One big difference from how I have normally shifted with iron is that the wool that we dyed was pre-treated with a mordant of iron. So the fiber itself had already been saturated with iron and cured and dried, and then we put that into the various yellow dye pots. We had, I believe, 5 different species of yellow producing mushrooms that we worked with, and all of them with the iron shift except for the one that I worked on turned to beautiful shades of green, either olivey or more cool shades of green, mint, sage type colors. The dye pot that I was working with and the mushroom there was being just as it should be in nature, giving us whatever it wanted to give us. And they had noticed that this particular mushroom had been light in the yellow realm earlier in the day, and then didn't really want to shift to green, even with an iron mordant piece of wool. I had to laugh silently, or to myself, or with you in my larger community, because you know I can never get green.
I really love the olive colors. Cool versus warm. Yeah.
They're all gorgeous. So today I went on my foray, and the foray was to the Port Townsend State Park, which is very close to this area. I was lucky enough to be invited to join someone who knew a little bit more about it, or a lot more about foraging for mushrooms. And we traipsed through a campground because that is a great place to start looking for one of the most prolific and also fantastic starter mushroom dyes, and that is one called Dyer's Polypore. Now, mushrooms like rain, and we haven't had a lot of it this last couple of months. A lot of the people here were talking about how very dry it was and how the season was not producing a lot of yield of mushrooms. However, we found a lot of Dyer's Polypore. Now, I didn't find it, but I was with people who were finding huge clumps of it, and now I'm excited to say I know what to look for. And it's not one that many people other than natural dyers are going to be looking for, because it doesn't work in a culinary way or in a medicinal way. So it's left just for the likes of you and me, and brings various shades of yellow into the dye pot, and you can do some shifting with it. So I got myself a small bag of the treasure that was found, and so I will be bringing that home, drying it, and then having it for a future Color Quest video where we can play around with it. But if you have a chance to start working with this, I understand Dyer's Polypore is a great place to start. So go looking at the bottom of fallen or dying trunks of the Douglas fir. That is the host area that it most prefers, and it can be easily mistaken, if you're like me, for something that doesn't look very mushroomy. There are all kinds of classifications of mushrooms that don't look like the typical gilled and capped versions, and this is one of them. This polypore is a type that has more of a shelf composition and is stuck to the side of the wood or on top of the wood. You've probably walked past it on more than one occasion. I know I have. And now I'm going to keep my eyes out, because it's something that I know I can bring into my dye pot. Very exciting. Day number 5 of the symposium, and today's class that I was very lucky to attend was on the color purple. Now, purple is fairly elusive across all kinds of plant matter, and mushrooms are no different. So we worked with several different species that were available, and unfortunately some of them are just not around this year, just too dry here in the Pacific Northwest, which is kind of a funny thing to say, but it's what's going on. So we still managed to work with some really spectacular options, and we did some shifting both in the alkaline realm as well as using pre-treated fiber that was in iron. So we got some darker shades coming from what would normally give us red, and we also got some beautiful light sort of grayish purple tones by using a few other species. And as you might guess, heat was something that we watched very carefully. So the fleeting colors of one or two of these species makes it super special for the time that it will stick around. Light fastness is not necessarily a strong suit with all of them, but there are one or two that will bring you purple that is long lasting. Another cool thing that I liked was one of the mushrooms that we used for green with an iron shift was the same mushroom used today to get purple. Be sure to use the strength of your mordants and your modifiers if there is pH sensitivity, because what I've seen here now over several days is that pH shifting is a fantastic tool in the world of mushrooms. So check out some of these purples that were gifted to us from the magical kingdom of mushrooms. Tonight, there's going to be a lecture by a woman who is remarkably renowned in the world of lichen dyes. I wasn't able to take any of her classes here, but I'm certainly going to be attending the lecture because you should see the colors that are coming in from lichen as well. So the last day, it was amazing. We had an opportunity to dye in the exhaust and some fresh baths of the mushroom dye that we had been working with over the entire week. It was a wonderful group activity, and I was lucky enough to put in a small sample of silk ribbon in each one of the pots. And I got the most glorious rainbow of colors. The mushroom and lichen dyes really love protein fibers, but we also had some people throwing in some cellulose. And the ultimate result, seeing all of those pieces of fiber hanging at the end, was probably the most spectacular natural color rainbow I have ever seen. Oh yeah, one more thing. We were given a sample of every single mushroom and lichen dye that was used here this week, and it was presented to us on this beautiful ring, amazing strands of wool in probably 60 different colors. Pretty amazing. The other really cool things that happened in the last evening was that we got to see the sample table where all of the mushrooms and lichen that had been foraged for during the week on the multiple forays were displayed. They had a mycologist who identified most everything, and I got to test my own knowledge to see what I may have picked up in the way of a little bit of mycology knowledge. If you are a fiber artist, and you probably are if you're watching this channel, this event, in terms of what was taught, the breadth of courses around fiber arts, was fantastic. And I actually wish I could have participated in one or two of them, particularly the wet felt hat class. Creations that people made were stunning. So definitely well worth a consideration for the future if you are interested in mycology, in mushrooms, in natural dyeing, or in fibers in general, and how they relate to the fungi world. Then this symposium is really one of the best things I've ever attended. The woman who is the US delegate did a fantastic job with her team of people to organize this event that had been postponed twice during the pandemic. And I'd like to thank the generosity, the incredible sharing of knowledge, and just the general goodwill and creativity of all of the people who attended, who managed everything, and who put on a spectacular workshop that was an incredible way of seeing yet another group of organic matter that can create the most vivid natural color in your dye pot. All right, it's time for me to head back over the water and think about what I might do next week on Color Quest. It seems like I should probably dye with some mushrooms. So what do you say that you join me next Friday as we look at least one of the mushrooms that we worked with here, so that you might get out there into your own forest and do some fall foraging for dyer's mushrooms. Have a great week. Thanks so much for joining me here at IFFS and for just being so into natural color. I'll see you next Friday. Natural. Probably the most